call. How does that sound? Okay. So this is a fuels mitigation Zoom call, and we're going to be discussing the fuels mitigation program and what it's all about and how people can go about getting a fuels mitigation grant and what the benefits are of doing that. So we have a couple folks with us today. We have John Huffler, the chair of Clearwater Resource Council. He's going to be providing an overview of the program and a little bit of history regarding the program. We have Jaylund Rammell, and he is one of the loggers that is certified with our program to do the fuel mitigation work. And then we have Sandy Pissarra, one of the landowners who's actually been a beneficiary of the Clearwater Resource Council Fuels Mitigation Grant Program. And then lastly, we have me. My name is Karen Miskey. I'm the Executive Director of the Clearwater Resource Council. So let's get started. And here's a meeting agenda for today. And I'm not going to read it all. You guys, I know, can see that. But for Jaylund's purposes, we're going to start with the CRC overview, and I think, John, you were going to provide us with a little bit of overview and history of the program. Okay.
So is that the next slide?
Sure. Okay, there we go.
Yeah. So CRC first got involved with fuel mitigation work back in about 2003, 2004. We had an opportunity to spend at that point $15,000 through a partnership with the Swan Ecosystem Center to do some fuel mitigation work. And at that time, we had been working on putting a fire plan together for the valley. And CRC was just getting formed, and that was one of the first things we did was tried to put some fuel mitigation dollars on the ground. With that, we also started the Fuel Mitigation Task Force that is served to look at, well, the fuel fire and coordinate across agencies and organizations and make available dollars to do fuel mitigation work since 2004 on. Initially, we contracted with the Bitterroot R&D to help oversee the program and provide some of the technical assistance. But then in, I believe, around 2010, we took over the program entirely and got the grants directly into the Clearwater Resource Council and have been administering that program ever since. Purpose of the program is basically to help the community address fire and fuel mitigation, to try and make the community a little safer for fire. We do live in a fire-prone landscape, and we know we're going to have fire, and so it just makes sense for us to get as prepared as we can for when fires come. Our fuel mitigation program has a couple of funding sources. The primary one is something called the Western States dollars. These are our federal dollars through the Forest Service that come down through the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation with the state of Montana. They make grant programs available. We put in proposals for funding and get funding then if we're successful in putting in that grant proposal to DNRC, and we administer then the dollars that come in through that program. The program has certain guidelines around it. It is a fuel mitigation program, so treatments on the ground have to meet certain specifications as Karen will go into more in a little bit. And there are some matching requirements for that and some maximum amounts that we can offer per acre through the program. We have had a number of these projects and have made quite a few dollars available to the community since 2004. In addition to the Western states, there's also a program called Hazardous Fuels that's a little more restrictive. They are also funds that come down through the Forest Service, but they are more directly tied to Forest Service activities and have to be spent in areas that are potentially at risk from Forest Service burning programs, whether that's slash burning or pile burning or prescribed burning. And then we've also gotten some funding from a few other sources along the way, smaller amounts of funding. And we try to make as many of those funds available to the community, to landowners as possible. So that's just kind of a brief history and overview without going into a lot of detail. If folks have any more questions on that, we can fill in more detail later on. Let me turn it back over to Karen then to talk a little about the application process and our current funding status.
Thank you, John. So one of the things regarding the fuels mitigation program that I probably get the most calls on is people calling and saying, well, how do I go about doing this? And what am I supposed to do? And I can't find the application and all of that kind of stuff. So we thought this call might be useful to help answer some of those questions and just streamline the process a little bit. So if you're interested in trying to get some fuel mitigation dollars, the first thing you need to do is go onto our website and download the application. And the application will allow you to basically give us all of the initial information that we need to make some preliminary assessments about whether your property would fall within the guidelines of the grant proposal and the grant contract that we have with the state to do this work. So fill out the application and send it back to us. We then review the application and we'll get back to you with either no, this doesn't quite fall within the parameters of the project, or yeah, this potentially does fall within the parameters of the project and we'd like to come and do a site visit at your property. We then work with you to schedule a site visit, and we come and we take a look and see what you have and make some preliminary determination on whether or not your property falls within the purview of this project, which is first and foremost a fuels mitigation project. So these are not designed to be restoration projects. These aren't designed to, for instance, inherently benefit wildlife, for instance, or to inherently improve riparian corridors. These are designed first and foremost to protect life and to protect property, and really to prevent catastrophic wildfire, or if not to prevent, to limit the damages associated with catastrophic wildfire. So there are a few general parameters that apply when we're looking at fuels mitigation projects. The first is there should be an average of 10 feet between each tree. So between each crown, essentially, crown spacing. Down and dead timber should be removed. And the reason for that is, we don't want a big group of fuels that start to accumulate and can increase the intensity of a wildfire if and when it does come through. And then the third is to reduce ladder fuels. And we'll talk a little bit more about ladder fuels and what that means and why that's important. But that would be the third part. Now, that said, those are the general criteria that we're working with. If you have a particular stand of trees where you want it to be a little closer than 10 feet, that can be managed too. But the general guidelines are designed to protect your life, to protect your property from catastrophic wildfire, hence those criteria are in place. So after we come and do the site visit, generally what we say is, yes, we can treat this many acres potentially, and then it falls to the property owner to work with one of our pre-approved logging operators to come and to look at your property and to get you a bid. And then the logger will essentially tell you, well, I can thin your property for $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000, whatever it is. And there'll be and Jaylund can speak to this, and there are a variety of factors that go into determining what the cost is per acre. So it could be, how thick are the trees, how steep is the terrain, things like that. Once you get that bid from the contractor, or if you wanted to get more than one bid, you can do that too. But once you get the bid from the contractor, you contact us, you send us that bid, and then we will say, okay, that looks good. We can pay you up to X dollars per acre to offset the costs that you're incurring. What we do ask all property owners to do is, prior to starting the project, prior to any trees being cut or thinned, you do take photos of the property. Then once your logging is finished and your thinning is finished, you take a post photo of the property as well, so that we can have for our records pre and post photos. And then once the logging is finished, you would get us the invoice from the contractor, send that invoice to us, and we will come and do a post-site visit. And that's just to make sure that the work is done according to the specifications of the contract that we sign with you. And at that point, you would get reimbursed if everything looks as it should be. The slash also has to be disposed of, so that's something to consider in terms of the timing of your project. So for instance, if you get your work done in the middle of the summer, you're probably not going to be able to burn your slash in August. So just something to think about, something to consider when you're planning your project. It may well be that leaving the slash there until the fall isn't a problem. However, that also might be a concern for you. So those are things to think about when you're planning this. The other thing to think about from a planning perspective is, making sure that your contractor or your logger, especially if they're bringing equipment onto your property, has cleaned and fully decontaminated their equipment before they bring it onto your property. So you don't really want to trade one problem for another. If you have a lot of overgrown trees, you don't want to trade that for a weed problem. So before the contractor comes on, make sure and ask that he is fully cleaned his equipment, so that you don't get a weed problem post thinning. I think those are the primary pieces of the application process. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. If no questions, I will keep going. John mentioned the grants that we typically have to fund this work, and the work has become popular, especially, I guess, since the Rice Ridge fire. I think folks are taking the threat and risks associated with wildfire more seriously. So even though we got a pretty sizable grant, which kicked in January of 2020, we've already run through a significant portion of the funding. We have a little less than $20,000 left. So, if you have an interest in doing a thinning project, I would strongly encourage you to get applications in sooner rather than later. We do have another, we have 3 other grants pending, but a pending grant is not money in hand. So if you have an interest, I would encourage you to apply sooner rather than later. We're optimistic we'll get more funds, but we can't guarantee that. John, is there anything else that I forgot that you might want to add in here?
No, I think you covered it pretty well, Karen.
Okay.
I guess I would just add that, to be clear, that the landowners contract with the contractors to do the work. We set up a contract with each landowner around the grant that says what the expectations are and what Clearwater Resource Council will pay landowners. But it's up to the landowners to do the actual contracting and to hire the contractors to do the work. We don't do that.
Good point. Thank you. Okay, pre and post thinning. So these are taken in the double arrow area, and it's just providing an example of what can be done with a thoughtful thinning process and how you can improve, I think, both the look of the property from an aesthetic point of view, but also equally important from a fuels reduction, risk reduction point of view. So the photo on your left, you'll see, is pretty overgrown. The trees are close together. There's a fair amount of down timber, although there's certainly properties that have far more down timber than this in the double arrow area. And then on the right-hand side, you see that the trees are spaced further apart. There's more sunlight coming through. There's more grass growing, and all of the down timber has been removed. So generally speaking, we're looking for thinning projects that are going to remove the smaller trees, but there are occasions where you have to have some big trees come out to make sure that you have adequate spacing and that you're fully mitigating risk, essentially. Any questions on that one, or should I go to the next one? Okay. So I just wanted to touch here on the benefits of thinning, and this is a very suburban representation, so it's not necessarily representative of the properties, but it still gives you an idea of what we're talking about. So what we're trying to do is limit the amount of vegetation that could essentially catch on fire and expose your home to embers and or burn right up to your home in certain cases. So the goal is to have what they call defensible space. And you can see from this example, and granted it is a suburban characterization, but the amount of trees near the primary structure has greatly been reduced. And that's kind of what we're aiming for. And then this representation is showing you ladder fuels and the issues associated with ladder fuels and why we want to reduce the amount of ladder fuels on the landscape. So if you'll see those smaller trees under the big trees with the tree crowns, those are considered the ladder fuels, and they're ladder fuels because those trees can catch on fire more easily. They're small trees, and once they catch on fire, they can basically light the larger trees on fire. And what we're trying to do here is prevent catastrophic wildfires. So if there are trees on the landscape that are 500 years old, we'd like to see them, for the most part, stay on the landscape. So if we can reduce the ladder fuels, we can protect those big old trees, and we can avoid crown fires. What they've also found is that crown fires tend to be much more intense. They do much more damage. They do much more damage to the soil because the intensity of the fire can even create hydrophobic soil conditions. So we really want to avoid really hot, really intense fires. And the way we do that is to prevent crown fires. We want to prevent the big old trees from burning down. So if we take out, and I don't know, can you guys see with the little pointer here? But if we take out these trees here, we can protect your property better, and we can protect the large trees better, and we can prevent or at least limit the damage from catastrophic wildfire. And then the other thing to think about when you're looking at your property is species selection and retention. So Ponderosa pine and larch have been in this landscape for a long time. They're fire-adapted trees. The Native Americans that lived here burned on a regular, ongoing basis, and larch and Ponderosa pine both were adapted to withstand fire. Now, when I say adapted to withstand fire, I don't mean crown fires. I mean relatively low intensity ground fires, as you see kind of on the left-hand side here. However, if your property has a lot of lodgepole, for instance, which is far more flammable and does not do nearly as well in forest fires, you want to think about really kind of thinning those more aggressively. Whereas the Ponderosa pine and the larch can withstand a certain amount of fire. And then, this is really the end goal. So you'll see the house in the background survived a pretty catastrophic wildfire. And they did probably, from the looks of it, pretty aggressive thinning. And then you'll see the house in the forefront of the photo did not fare as well. And you can see that that property was not probably thinned at all. There's a lot of brush. The trees are really thick. So, you know, one of the things that we didn't mention yet, and we focus mostly on the grant program for fuels mitigation, but one of the other things that CRC does is provide home site assessments. So we can come to your home and we can take a look and we can say, well, you know, yes, you probably need to have a fuels mitigation program or project done, but these are also the other 5 or 6 or 8 things that you can do to reduce the risk of property damage or loss of life even at your property. So it is important to think about, especially as the season heats up and we're going to get warmer and warmer summers and we're going to probably have increased fire conditions on the landscape, to think about what you can do above and beyond simply thinning your trees to reduce the risk of wildfire. And then we're going to kind of transition here into some the perspective of Jaylund Rammell. He's a local logger that works with us and has done a lot of projects for us. But before we transition to Jaylund, are there any questions about any of the slides that we just discussed? No? Okay, let's transition to Jaylund then.
Hold on, this is Suzanne Esber, if I may. I didn't get my unmute to get unmuted fast enough. You said that lodgepole pine is a more aggressive burn. Are there other species of trees, like is Douglas fir also one that, are there other species of trees that we want to watch out for, and those might be ones that would be removed first?
So Doug fir probably is not quite as fire resistant as larch or Ponderosa pine, but John is more our resident expert, so I am going to let him answer that.
Okay, sure. Yeah, depending on what you have on any piece of property, if you have Ponderosa pine or larch, those are trees that we recommend leaving for a number of reasons. One, if they're fire able to handle more fire. And frankly, with a warming environment and all, they are going to be able to do fairly well in the future in this landscape compared to some others. Doug fir kind of intermediate. They have grown in a lot thicker because they come in shade in the understory, and so a lot of properties need to have Doug fir thinned out, but they also do fairly well with fire, so leaving some larger Doug fir are not too much of an issue. The lodgepole are a shorter lived species, tend to burn hotter, do not do well if the fire does come through. It tends to kill them off even if the fire is in the understory, so they're a good species to thin out. And if you have sometimes in wetter areas, you'll start to get some spruce and such, and they're probably okay to have around. We generally don't do a lot of thinning in and around any riparian areas. So all of those are kind of considerations that we can help you in looking at your property and deciding what makes the most sense to thin out and what makes sense to leave. And most of your logging contractors have a pretty good idea of what the benefits are of leaving or taking out certain species.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? Okay. Well, let's transition to Jaylund. Jaylund, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So can you just tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I was raised in the Seeley Lake area here and started in the logging industry shortly after high school. I worked for numerous companies for the first 10 years. And then in 1991, I decided to start my own business and have been doing this ever since. And we just basically specialize in residential forestry.
Great. From your perspective, what have you seen as the benefits of the fuel mitigation projects that you've worked on?
Well, you've kind of touched on a few of them, but I'll go ahead and do so as well. Obviously, fire is one of them. The general health of the stand can be improved by the fuel mitigation. And actually your property values can also increase if the job is done correctly, because most of your nicer, bigger trees will be left behind, and it'll be a much more of a park-like setting.
Okay. And from your perspective, what components need to be considered when planning a fuels mitigation project?
Well, if you're near any riparian areas, of course, you need to avoid those. There are times when you can leave snags as long as they don't pose a problem, you know, insofar as hitting a structure or something, because a lot of birds use the snags for nesting cavities. And then on the species selection, you kind of already talked about. I would mirror that insofar as, you know, you want to leave as much of the Ponderosa and larch as you can, but you always, every single project is a little bit different. I wouldn't necessarily recommend leaving a bad larch just because it's a larch. Sometimes if there's a really healthy Doug fir next to a bad larch, you would take the larch out. But overall, I agree with what you had said about the species selection.
Okay. And how do steep slopes impact how you thin a piece of land?
Not really. We still, I mean, we have to be, you have to make sure that your equipment is going to be able to deal with the steep slope, but the overall thinning is basically the same. When the project's done, I think you need to think about a little on some areas in particular. If you use the trail numerous times, you've got to do some erosion control and some reseeding, but I think that would be about it.
Okay. Are there particular benefits to conducting fuel mitigation projects at different times of the year? And if so, what are the pros and cons of, say, doing summer versus winter versus spring versus fall?
Well, winter is actually a very good time to do, you know, providing we don't have excessive snow. It's a really good time to do the logging because there's almost no ground impact whatsoever. But you still need to get in there prior to winter and take care of the ladder fuels and the down fuel on the ground, because you're not going to be able to do that with the snow on the ground. The summer is not really a very good time, at least in my opinion, because you're going to have a good deal of slash that you're probably not going to be able to burn. And that's what we do. We burn it as we go. It's just the most cost-efficient way of doing it, and it creates minimal impact to the property, because if you burn as you go, you only affect about a 10 by 10 area, so you don't have to create a large opening in the middle of your trees to accommodate a large slash pile that has to be burned in the fall or winter. I don't know if I covered all of the seasons there or not. I guess in this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I guess I have a follow-up question to that. So you can do those smaller 10 by 10 slash burn piles in the summer?
We can up till the time they suspend burning, which is typically on a typical year would be the July 4th weekend. That's where they would suspend it.
Okay. And when do they, what is the general time frame? And I know this varies from year to year, I get that, but when do they generally reopen burning?
I would say on an average year, it's probably around the 1st of October.
Okay, perfect. Okay. What is your advice to residents considering a fuels reduction project?
Well, I would just say do it sooner than later. You just never know what this fire season's going to bring or what the next disease that's going to be in the valley that we'll be dealing with. And it's the sooner your forest is thinned, the more likely it'll be able to survive whatever presents itself, whether it be fire or a forest insect.
Okay. Thank you, Jaylund. Does anybody have any questions for Jaylund?
This is Suzanne. Jaylund, have you ever contracted with multiple homeowners, landowners, to do I'd say a sort of a multi-homeowner project?
I have actually. We've done that up around Placid Lake.
Okay.
I don't recall any other area, but it's been a good many years, so I'm sure I'm forgetting some of them.
Okay. Okay.
I have a follow-up question to Suzanne. So Jaylund, when you did that community project, do you feel like that there were cost savings that resulted by doing several properties at once?
No, I wouldn't say that. It was just a matter of us staying in the area and getting everything done. They were all fairly small projects, none of them very large. So it was just, and I believe they were all related too, so they just kind of wanted to do it as a unit.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, I might add though that, Karen, that it is possible by pooling some properties together to get some savings in the cost, particularly when it comes to trying to. One of the things we try to do is if the logging project is going to produce some saleable materials, logs or pulp, by pooling some smaller lots together, it often makes the sale of those products more economical for a return to the landowners, because you would have full trucks, for example, going out with those materials and such. So it doesn't always work that way, but there can be definite benefits from combining a number of landowners.
Thanks, John. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, let's see. I'm wondering if what the process is to go from, okay, now we've decided we want to do it. We've talked to Clearwater, we've gotten a match, but we have to find a contractor. So like, what would be the process in doing that?
So we have a list of pre-approved loggers that you can call, and you can ask them to visit your property and they will give you a bid. I would be sure when you get the bid, you find out exactly, you know, what they're planning to do, and you should express your needs about what you want them to do. And then they will send you bids. You pick a contractor out of the bids you get, and then you send that information to us. John, do you want to jump in here too? Did I leave anything out?
Sure. There are quite a range of contractors out there that operate with different types of equipment. For example, some contractors are more designed to do large projects with heavier equipment, and that may bring the cost down per acre, but results in a little heavier hit on the land when they do the work. So depending on the project and size of it and how light.
Ours is pretty small, like an acre.
Yeah, so you know, there are some contractors that probably wouldn't be the best for you if with any of their heavier equipment. It just doesn't make sense for them to come in and bring it in that smaller project. And then there are other contractors that use much smaller, lighter equipment, and much more suitable for a small project like you're talking about.
So is that in the list? Is that designated in the list?
Yeah, we do try to designate some of that in the list, and the list has some information about what kind of equipment the loggers have for doing the work.
Okay, perfect.
And then, but you probably should be looking at, when you talk to loggers, what they have for insurance coverage, things like a workman's comp or equivalent, some of those kinds of questions that are important to consider. But yeah, we generally just provide a list of contractors that have made themselves, said they're interested in working in this area. And then beyond that, it's really up to the landowner to identify which ones are likely to be the best for your particular work.
Okay, so then once the contractor gives us a bid, then we would submit that bid to you, and then you'd say how much subsidy you're willing to give.
Right, because there can be quite a range in the cost per acre of doing this work, and we can cover a certain amount of that, and but we typically cover up to about 50% of the project cost. Occasionally we can go a little higher than that. But
that's wonderful.
Yeah, if a contractor is going to come in and we can easily cover the 50% of the project cost, then that's great. On some projects, you know, we're going to get a bid in and we won't be able to come up to that 50% level just because of our restrictions of cost per acre. And so then it will be up to the landowner to make those decisions about which contractors and which bids and what kind of work they want to get done.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay.
Hey, Karen, I had a question. This is Jaylund.
Sure.
Yeah, it just was in regards, I've always, after I've met with the landowner, I've always presented them with a bid first, and then if they wanted to move forward, then I would simultaneously send that to the CRC and the landowner at the same time. Does that still work?
Yeah, I mean, as long as I have some kind of email from the landowner saying, yes, we want to go ahead with this, I think that does work.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that's fine. Any other questions? Okay, let's transition over to Sandy. Sandy did a fuels mitigation project with CRC and Jaylund as her logger a couple of years ago. So I was hoping she could tell us a little bit about that today, so that you guys on the phone considering a project can get a better sense of her experiences. Sandy, are you there? Oh, hi. Can you tell us a little bit about your property, how many acres, and what you had done and why you decided to undertake a fuels mitigation project? Oh, wait, I think you're muted. You have to unmute. If you go to the top of your screen, a bar should pop up, and you hit the unmute or on the little.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, my husband and I moved in. It's a property on the Double Arrow Ranch. It's about 3.5 acres, and we moved in last July. So there was quite a lot of dead timber and dead trees standing, and it was quite a mess. And we knew right away we wanted to get something taken care of. So we had talked to the realtor when we were going through the purchasing process, and visited a little bit about what's the good way to get rid of this deadfall that's all over the place, and he kind of explained the process a little bit, and then we were given Jaylund, Rammell's name, and we visited with him, and we got started down that road with the DNRC, And you've had some shuffling people, but it was a really, it worked out really, really well. We're very happy with how it turned out. Okay.
Can you give folks any tips on getting through the application process? What was your experience with that?
What do you think? It went really well. It was just kind of, it was a learning for us because we didn't really know what we were doing, but Jaylund really did help us. And when he submitted his bid to us and to you guys, or to the DNRC simultaneous, that helped quite a bit to save some time. Yeah, it just worked really well. We had a few issues with we have a creek in our property that has fish in it. So there was a few things that we learned there about do's and don'ts, but Jaylund was very helpful because we walked around the property and we looked at all the trees. Okay, this should go, and it was obvious to, the dead ones or the sick ones, so we wouldn't have problems in the future. It was a good.
Good. How long did it take from the time you submitted an application until the time the treatment was finished and you guys were reimbursed? What was your time frame, give or take?
Oh, it was probably 3 months, 3 months or so. I've got my husband here to help me remember. Yeah, it was probably 3 months.
Okay. And would you do anything differently if you were to pursue another fuels mitigation project?
No, it
No?
worked so well. It was great. The property looks fabulous.
Good, great. I'm glad to hear it. So is there anything else you want to add? I don't have any other questions for you really, but is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I can't say enough for Jaylund Rammell. He did such a great job for us.
Good, I'm glad.
And I'm glad you have a full-time person now, Karen. I'm glad that's gonna streamline things a lot.
So for folks that don't know, I just joined CRC in October of 2019. So I'm still kind of a newbie. So that's what Sandy is referring to. But does anyone have any questions for Sandy?
This
Sandy.
is Barry Johnson. A question to Sandy or Jaylund. Were there commercial logs involved, and what happened with those? Were they removed or what?
I'll let Jaylund take that one. If he's still there.
Okay. Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, what happens is we'll estimate the value of the commercial logs to be removed, and that goes towards the cost of the project, so that much less that the landowner has to pay. There's always sometimes it's pretty minimal. It's never a tremendous amount because the end result is we want to leave the nicer, healthier trees. So there's not going to be a lot of logs removed from a typical property.
Thank you.
Is there any chance of getting logs for our fireplace at the same time?
Oh yes, you mean firewood?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do that all the time. It just depends on what the landowner's needs are, and if we can accommodate that, we certainly will.
Okay. So that would just be part of the bid or a separate bid?
Well, we'd have to see what's available on your property, assuming that you have traditional firewood, which would be, standing dead. Then it would just be a point of, or matter of just putting that somewhere for you.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
Sandy, can you share with us the funds you received, and then what was the cost sharing, or just an estimate ballpark?
Let's see. We ended up with About, it was.
I think it was 800.
Yeah, I think it was 800 an acre that we received from the DNRC or the CRC to mitigate our cost.
And did you have an additional cost for you, and matching cost that, or
Yes, we
matching?
did.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, we did. It was about
I don't remember what the entire I think it was 9,000.
I think it was 9,000 for the entire property, and that was 3.5 acres, and it was pretty thick. It was pretty thick.
Your land was pretty dense, huh?
It was pretty, yeah, lots of dead down stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah, like Jaylund can talk to it better probably. Yeah, it was kind of a mess. I don't know if he's there. He's not there.
Yeah, I'm here. I just didn't.
I think the question was, Suzanne wanted to know what Sandy's costs were. So apparently CRC reimbursed at 800 an acre, but do you remember what the total cost per acre was approximately?
I would think it was around 2,200, I believe.
Okay.
Oh, well, that 9,000 included. Then you deducted. Then we would have to deduct what he sold the lumber for too.
Oh, yeah, right.
I forgot about that.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
so it was quite a bit less than 9,000.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Sure.
Hopefully you heard that. Yeah.
Sure.
Does anyone else have any more questions for Sandy?
So Sandy, you said from the time at which you applied for the funding and the work was done, can you talk a little bit then about when this all took place for you? Like you applied for the funding maybe in the winter, and then when was the work done?
Let's see. We applied it, I think, August. It was in August. Because we moved in like the middle of July, and it was August. And then we had some issues with people moving in and out of that job position and the application. Anyway, we were done by we'd received the payment around in November.
The work was
work was done in October. It was totally done, wasn't it?
Jaylund, I hope Jaylund can remember.
Yeah, I hope Jaylund can remember, but I think it was October. I think they didn't start till maybe September. But it went pretty quickly.
Sounds like it.
So, Susan, in part, it will go as fast or as slow to a large extent as the landowner also makes it go. So, sometimes we have people who submit an application, we go look at the property, and they say, great, we're going to get you bids. And then, 6 months goes by, and then they get us a bid. So part of this is a function of how quickly you're turning things around on your end as well. So I think in Sandy's case, things must have gotten turned around really quickly. So you submitted an application, you got the bid in right away. So I think that's also why things moved as quickly as they did. And then Jaylund was able to work on your property right away, which was also nice because sometimes the contractors are busy, so they can't get to you the minute you sign the contract. So there are a couple of factors that are going to factor into how quickly this will all take place. Some of which are in your control, and some of which probably aren't completely in your control.
Is there a deadline to use the funding once you've gotten the go-ahead for saying you're going to receive this funding, and but then let's say you sit on it and don't do your project for 3 years?
There's a contract. Yes, there is a contract that's signed between CRC and the landowner. That contract will have an end date. And the reason it has an end date, and I just had this discussion with the landowner the other day, the reason it has an end date is because we get grant funds, and those grant funds also have an expiration date. So if our grant funds go away, we then can't necessarily guarantee you payment. So it is important that if there is a deadline, we kind of adhere to the deadline. Now that said, if you foresee that you're going to have a problem for whatever reason, whether it's something on your end, whether it's on the contractor's end, whatever, you know, call us in advance and we'll try to figure this out and work it out. So it's not to say that it's absolute, but it's helpful to try to adhere to the deadlines to the greatest, you know, to the greatest extent possible. Other questions? Okay, let's go to the next slide. These are the final chance for Q&A, and then we're wrapping up. Any last questions?
Well, this is Suzanne, and this isn't a question, but I just wanted to say to John, I'm the one who called and talked with you about 2 weeks ago. I'm a resident of Big Sky Lake and talked with you about the potential for a multi-homeowner project at Big Sky Lake.
Right.
So I'd like to,
Yeah.
without sort of having, you know, asking my questions now, I wonder if I might follow up with you at a later time and we can, you know, pursue this project approach. We're, like I said, the board is interested in a multi-property owner, homeowner project at Big Sky Lake. We're encouraging our residents to thin their property, and we're, like I said, interested in seeing if there's a way for us to have the work done sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely. I've tried to return the call to you, and we just need to set a time I can get together with you or others, and we can talk through your potential project.
Terrific.
Anybody else? Last chance for questions. Okay. So I would really like to thank all of you for joining us tonight. I know time is precious to everybody, so thank you. It was great to have you. And I'd also like to especially thank Sandy and Jaylund and John Hoffler for presenting tonight, and a special thanks to Emily McGirt, our Big Sky Watershed Corps member, for helping set up this presentation tonight. So thank you, everybody. And if folks have questions or comments, please feel free to get in touch with us via any of these methods that are listed here, or you can call myself, you can call John, visit the CRC website, and you can get our contact information. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night.
Thanks. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.